Hey, hey, hey! I hope you guys had an amazing weekend and that you're ready to have a great week of school together. Let's start our week off right with our Bible class, in which we are contemplating why is it that I should believe in some book that supposedly a superior being has handed down from heaven to me on planet Earth. And we've looked at the field of oceanography, and we're ready to move on from that, and we'll be doing that, if not with nearly with every class period from this point forward. And we're going to be looking at the field of health for this week. And I feel like that's very appropriate for what it is that we're facing, not only in our country, but as well our world right now. And there's actually some good advice that was given in an ancient book that was written many, many millennia ago that we call the Bible. Now, we're going to be, to start with, in the book of Leviticus. And so if you will, turn there. And we're not going to be looking from here, there, and all over the place. Just 3 passages. And they're going to be close together. They're all going to come from what's called the Pentateuch. You might have heard that term before. Penta, referring to 5. And Tuch, book. It's a Greek word, even though it's about the Old Testament Hebrew Scriptures. And it means 5 books, literally. And we're going to be looking not at all 5 of them, but within only the confines of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Now, the person who wrote these is Moses, and that's stated a few different times and in different ways in these first 5 books. And I do want to point out something as we get things starting, looking at the field of health as to why it is that we can trust in the Bible. When Moses wrote these things, it was around 1450 BC, possibly as late as around 1400 BC, that he did so. Okay, just keep that in mind as we go through these things. Are you in Leviticus chapter 11 yet? That would be great if so. If not, get there. Leviticus 11, and I'm going to read to you from verse number 8, when God was laying down dietary laws for His people through a mediator or a lawgiver whose name was Moses. Leviticus 11:8. You shall not touch any of their flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses or their bodies. They are unclean to you. What God has in mind that He's telling His people is, I want you to stay away from, under this law that He had with the Israelites, given through Moses, I want you to stay away from, the word that's used is unclean animals. And what He means by that is they simply are not sanitary. Well, why is that the case? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fluids, either that would run through these creatures' bodies or that would be on these entities' bodies, and maybe even in solid form as well. But certainly, these creatures that are under consideration had toxic juices associated in one way or another with their bodies. And I'm not going to go through and read this whole list, but I encourage you to look at it. And I do want to identify just a few of these that are brought out. One of them that is mentioned is bats. Okay, what's dangerous as far as juices go involving bats? Well, I'm sure that you know this, and they're not the only creature that is this way, but they are frequent carriers of rabies, which is extremely dangerous to human beings and potentially quite fatal. Rabies, very dangerous for human beings, right? But here's something else that we now know about bats. Now, we haven't known this for very long, but that they carry a lot of viruses within them and even at times on them. In fact, we scientifically know that they carry at least 100 viruses an average bat carries on it. And it's really strange that this lesson has fallen when it has, because I really didn't plan it this way. But with what's going on with the coronavirus, you probably know as well as I do, that one of the stories that circulates that this virus all started from a person in China who ate a bat that was afflicted with it. You know, I don't want you to think I'm trying to perpetuate that theory. I'm not real sure that I buy into that particular one, and that's really not why I'm bringing this up. However, we do know that bats carry many viruses, strangely, to which they are immune, but that human beings are not immune to most of them, and they can be very dangerous to them, and that's why it's not a good idea for a person to eat a bat. Now, you might be thinking, why in the world would any person eat a bat anyway? Well, people have in former years, but you realize that there are countries of the world that people still do eat bats today. And part of the reason that story is circulated, whether accurate or not, is that there are some people in China who eat bats. In fact, in 2003, there was an article that was published by Science magazine in which a scientist strongly encouraged people, do not eat bats. And the reason for that is there are people who still do it around the world, even though it's very dangerous to human beings. But it's really interesting that nearly 3,500 years ago, God told his people, hey guys, just stay away from bats. They're unclean, or they're unsanitary for you. Now, a second group of creatures, and there are a number of them that are considered in Leviticus 11, are reptiles. Now, what do you know about reptiles as far as what they carry on them? How about the bacteria? I want to make sure I spell it correctly. It's difficult to say right, much less to spell, I assure you. But salmonella, okay, salmonella, which once again is very dangerous to human beings, but there are many other germs that reptiles commonly carry on them too. The Missouri Department of Conservation, the Centers for Disease Control, don't really advise people just to normally handle reptiles. And some of them, yeah, they have some venom and they could put that into your bloodstream and really hurt you. Okay, I get that. But the reason, though, that they do so is not just those that carry venom within their systems, but all reptiles in general, because it's very easy to contract dangerous germs to us from them. God said, hey guys, just stay away from handling, okay, reptiles because they're unclean or they're unsanitary. What about various sorts of scavengers? And there's a whole list of those that are brought to our attention. We probably know creatures like vultures and falcons and just go on down the list. Pigs would also fall into that category. Even dogs, okay? Even dogs. But scavengers, they will eat just about anything and everything. And because of that, it's going to be a crayon here, they pick up all sorts of bacteria and carry in their bodies, and certainly as well in their mouths and on their skin and their fur, their hair, all sorts of diseases, feathers as well, by the way, bacteria and diseases. And so if we're handling them, if we're eating them, it can be very easily be picked up, these bacteria and diseases that would be quite harmful to us. God said stay away from them. Those are unclean, they're unsanitary. Now, I'd like for us to move from this place to Numbers chapter 19. Can you do that for me, please? Numbers chapter 19. Having talked about unclean animals, let's have a discussion about dead bodies. All right, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. No, it's not, but we need to be aware of some things. And before we read from Numbers 19, what is it that dead bodies often have on or in them? Well, very similar to scavengers. I'm not saying that's what we are, but a deceased body, if not already possessing it, very rapidly will have dangerous bacteria and diseases that living people can contract from them. And so God gave his people this instruction in Numbers chapter 19, starting in verse 11. Whoever touches the dead body of any person shall be unclean, in other words, unsanitary, for 7 days. He shall cleanse himself with the water on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day, and so be clean. But if he does not cleanse himself on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day, he will not become clean. Whoever touches a dead person, the body of anyone who has died, and does not cleanse himself, defiles the tabernacle of God. And that person shall be cut off from Israel, because the water for impurity was not thrown on him. He shall be unclean. His uncleanness is still on him. This is the law when someone dies in a tent. Everyone who comes into the tents and everyone who is in the tent shall be unclean 7 days. And every open vessel that has no cover fastened on it is unclean. It's unsanitary as well because it had nothing to protect its contents. Whoever in the open field touches someone who is killed with a sword or who died naturally, or touches a human bone or a grave shall be unclean, unsanitary, 7 days. For the unclean they shall take some ashes of the burnt sin offering, and fresh water shall be added in a vessel. Then a clean person shall take hyssop, and dip it in the water, and sprinkle it on the tent, and on the furnishings, and on the persons who are there, and on whoever touched the bone, or the slain, or the dead, or the grave. And the clean person shall sprinkle it on the unclean on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day. Thus on the 7th day he shall cleanse him, and he shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and at evening he shall be clean. Okay, I want you to go back to verse 6. I know that's pretty lengthy. The other one won't be as bad, like the first one. But go back to verse 6 of Numbers 19, and then we'll put all this together. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet yarn and throw them into the fire, burning the heifer. And then the ashes of a heifer, and then this fluid is going to be sprinkled then on a person who has come in contact with a dead body, so that he or she will then be declared as clean after the 3rd day doing so, after the 7th day of doing so. As you read through this stuff, first of all, it just seems really boring, if we're truthful. Secondly, it almost sounds like there's some kind of hocus-pocus potion that's been thrown together that supposedly and magically, if you believe in that kind of stuff, is supposed to help people. Well, that's maybe what people thought back then, but once things have developed and we've gained a better understanding of the chemical composition of things and their usages, we can look at this information now differently. And here's why. Hyssop is an herb. It actually comes from the mint family, and as you might consider from that, is aromatic, or smells really good. It's made of these small clusters of flowers. But hyssop has some real benefits to it. We now know. People didn't always know that. It is what's called an antiseptic. Okay? Antiseptic. If I can write an M, I will be in good shape. Let me try it again. G-E-R-M. Oh, that's beautiful. S. An antiseptic gets rid of germs. Using a mouthwash like, say, Listerine. Whew, strong stuff if you do so. I use the scaled down version of Listerine. It's the natural form, but it's still an antiseptic, and the purpose of rinsing my mouth out every night with that is it kills germs that are found in your mouth. It's an antiseptic. Well, hyssop is also an antiseptic, and so when someone would have that placed on his or her body, it would help rid the living body of any potential germs that might have been contracted from the dead body. It's mentioned that cedar wood extracts were to be used in being sprinkled on the person. Well, they had no way of knowing this at the time, but we now understand that cedar wood, I'm going to have to go up here to finish writing this. Cedar wood has antibacterial properties. That is, it kills bacteria with which it comes into contact. Well, why would that be helpful after someone has touched a dead body? Because there might have been bacteria from that deceased corpse that came onto the living person from the contact that was made with the deceased vessel. Those people had no idea that at the time. But somehow the writer knew really good advice to give to people who might have contracted bacteria or some sort of disease from a dead body. And lastly, it's mentioned that the ashes of a heifer are to be a part of this elixir that is sprinkled on a person. Well, we still know, and you might have seen this at the booth, there's actually a shop for this at Silver Dollar City where there's lye soap that is made. Okay, lye soap, and the reason that is sold as soap, lye, is because we understand that is a cleansing agent. In other words, when you're dirty, it makes you clean. Isn't that crazy that people who come in contact with dead bodies, and something that just sounds like it's a bunch of bogus nonsense, a bunch of witches mixing up a brew in a pot, But we now understand 3,500 years later that hyssop being placed into it would serve as an antiseptic, that cedar wood extracts have antibacterial properties in them, not to mention very high in vitamin C, which is helpful in fighting off disease. And as well, that the ashes of a heifer, essentially lye soap, would be used to help make the unclean person cleansed. That's pretty cool stuff, isn't it? Now my question is this: how did Moses know to write this stuff 3,500 years, 3,500 years ago, thousands of years before the discovery of the benefits of all these things in relation to bacteria and disease? Okay, just one more. Deuteronomy chapter 23, and as I advertised to you, this one's not going to take as long as what that one did. It's not nearly as lengthy in its extent. We're going to read Deuteronomy 23, verses 12 through 14. Everybody there? Deuteronomy 23, 12 through 14. You shall have a place outside the camp, and you shall go out to it. I wonder why. What are they doing? Verse 13. And you shall have a trowel with your tools, and when you sit down outside, you shall dig a hole with it, and turn back and cover up your excrement, which is a really nice way of saying poop. They're taking a D-U-M-P. All right, they're going number 2. But in doing that, Moses instructs them, don't do that inside the camp where everybody else is. Go outside the camp, dig a hole, and just, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, how animals often do that and have those instincts built within them? But go out, dig a hole, go to the bathroom, turn back, and cover up your number 2. Well, it gives one of the religious reasons here, verse 14. Because the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to give up your enemies before you, therefore your camp must be holy or clean, so that he may not see anything indecent among you and turn away from you. Translation: when God comes into your presence, he doesn't want to see your number 2. Just like as human beings, we don't want to see each other's number 2. So make sure you flush. Okay, I'm really not trying to be gross, and I'm only talking about this because God does. He's not trying to be gross either. He's looking out for his people. He says, when you need to go to the bathroom, something as simple as this, use the restroom outside of the camp. Dig a hole, go potty, cover it. When we read that kind of thing, we think, well, of course. Well, who wouldn't be that way? I want to consider a tragic occurrence. Again, I didn't draw this up, so God gets the credit for it, but it's really strange when and where this lesson has fallen. I didn't plan it. I'm sure that the good Lord did. But I'm sure you guys have studied in history. You might have done some of this even this year. The Black Plague has alternate names, probably better known as Black Death or the bubonic plague, that swept not only through Europe but as well the entire world in at least the range of AD 1300 to 18 through the 1800s, and some would extend it even larger in the span than that, which may be the case. Hold on, guys, I can't continue without ending my parentheses. I told Micaiah you can't do that. I told Caden in math class, both, you can't do that. You can't do it in Bible class either. Okay, I ended my parentheses. Well, go to the bathroom outside of the camp. The reason I'm bringing it up is this. I'll be honest and say this. We still don't know historically for sure why the Black Death came along and how it continued to be perpetuated in its fullness, okay? And it's debated. It's often thought, well, it was fleas from rats that carried the disease from person to person, and that could be. You know, it might have something to do with it, and it might not too. There's debate about it, but nearly all who have studied the matter are quite certain about this. The sanitary practices of the entire world, and especially Europe, in this span were not up to par. It was common for people just to dump their household waste out into the street and out into the walkways, which at times, I know it's gross, but even included their own human waste. And everybody's in agreement, basically, that in the very least, that didn't help what was going on here, and in fact, that may have been a really serious spreader of this terrible plague. Just common sanitary procedures that we know now that weren't known in this range of just anywhere from, say, a couple hundred to as much as 700 years ago. It resulted in some catastrophic things. And when I say catastrophic, I'm talking about in Europe alone, estimates are 20 million people died as a result of Black Death, the terrible plague. Now, was it a result only of bad hygiene? Probably not. There was likely some more to it than that. But had better hygiene been known, like God taught and encouraged His people in the Old Testament to practice, there probably wouldn't have been nearly this number of casualties that took place. Now that's just in Europe, but in worldwide, across the world, there were 75 million casualties that are believed to have passed away on the basis of this disease that was greatly propagated because good sanitary procedures, such as the simple one that's described in Deuteronomy 23, was not practiced. Well, when did people come to the realization that the hygiene that we employ is not just nice and not just a convenience, but is an absolute necessity? Guys, it wasn't even realized until really the time period just about when this ended, which might not be coincidental, by the way, but until the 19th century AD. Did you get that? The necessity of hygiene really wasn't understood and the things that are associated with that until the 1800s in the year of our Lord. Yet, when did God teach His people about good hygiene? When did He tell them about animals that is good to eat, animals that's bad to eat? In fact, don't even handle them. When did He tell them about the bacteria and the diseases that can be associated with dead bodies and try to stay away from them? If you coincidentally become in contact with them, here are some ways through antiseptics and antibacterial and cleansing agents to get rid of potential bacteria and disease. When did He tell His people these things? 3,000 plus years before they were discovered in the health community. Now you tell me, how did Moses in 1450 BC know about these things if he wasn't being directed by an all-wise person who seems to know everything about health? Guys, the Bible wasn't written as a book to practice good health. Okay, that's not why God has given it to us. But some of the things that are contained in it, and there's so much more we can go in this, I'm sure you're aware of that. But so much that's contained in it is very helpful to our health. And the writers knew things thousands of years before they were discovered in the health community. How could they know that without the guidance of an all-wise being? I'll let you answer.